Let's create a pivotal impact. Friends in the industry. So a couple of years ago, I took a really good training course that was dedicated to improving my ability to navigate through difficult conversations in the workplace. So there was two major takeaways that I took from that training course. First, the power of remembering someone's name. So if you think about it, not too many things in life you can claim as your own, such as your name. So when you introduce yourself to someone and in a conversation, they say, "Hey, Josh," it makes you feel pretty good because they remembered it. Second, I learned that one of the best ways to prevent a situation from getting bad to worse is by investing time and energy into preventing that situation from occurring in the first place. So this could be a workplace physical injury, like tripping over an extension cord, or preventing workplace violence. So in today's episode, I'm really excited as I speak to my good friend and industry workforce and labor specialist, Oriana Kolonsky. In our conversation, we dive into what is workplace violence, but also domestic violence, and what are some of the legal responsibilities employers have so that way they can mitigate it. Furthermore, we dive into an empathetic leadership approach over performance management approach and just the huge dividends that it pays. So I'm really looking forward to the impact this conversation is going to have on yourself and possibly your organization. Let's get to it. Oriana, honestly, welcome back to the Truck Focus podcast. Super excited for a lot of reasons for our conversation today. So a little backstory. Oriana, I've been good friends for, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 years now, but when I first launched the whole Truck Focus, well, we started actually as a blog, then a podcast journey. Oriana's been there from the start. And something that I really appreciate is her enthusiasm for the industry as an advocate, as a workforce specialist, but also just her appreciation of people. And I think that's something we've always aligned on is ultimately our industry is full of good people. And she really sees that. So excited as she comes on the podcast today, again, as a welcome back. So Oriana, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I mean, it's been a while, so I know I've been a little MIA, but it's nice to be back and get back into the swing of things and see you. And we're going to talk about an awesome topic. So that a lot of people don't want to talk about, or they think it's boring, but it's mandatory. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I think, the fact that we're both tough, it's a good topic because we can also lead with empathy throughout. So why don't you kind of start us off and give a quick recap? Who is Oriana? Also highlight your just time in the transportation industry so far.
Sure. So I came from government of Alberta. I moved around and then I fell into the trucking industry by going to the association. And I found a lot of different opportunities within the industry and solutions. And I drew a big passion for just even the big trucks, something I never thought I would find a passion for. The people, and, there's just so much opportunity within the industry. So that's something that really attracted me to that. And then I kind of moved on to creating and working on an HRS and a compliance system and software. And now I've kind of changed directions a little bit and work at WCB. So doing a little bit of industry work and on the side and working on podcasts with yourself and some writing publication work. But I'm always around and the industry is something that I want to stay in. So it's just something I really enjoy and just trying to be that ambassador for the industry because there's so much good and a lot going on too. So.
Yeah, I agree. And something that really stands out, there's two things that continuously stand out. So for those listening, she is an Oriana. Your backstory, I think, is really powerful because those aren't titles per se or organizations to take lightly, because ultimately those are organizations creating change. So part of it I really value is your knowledge base from an education standpoint, but also your willingness to learn, as well as the people focus. So have you always been someone that just naturally, I would almost say, defends and advocates for people, like that started in the playground of school and, hey, don't hit my friend or I'll hit you kind of attitude? Or where did that advocacy come from?
Well, it started from little for sure. Just being empathetic was always something. I always liked helping people. Didn't matter in what aspect. I also, from a young age, I remember there's a story. I used to get bullied sometimes. So it was something, being that underdog. And as I got older, that changed. But trying to develop my skills on how to better communicate with people, but being able to be empower people and find solutions and challenges. And in my work life and in everybody's life, create an impact is developed in so many different forms. I mean, and everyone has a unique, different set of skills, experience, and education. And that's what makes our world go round and how we can help grow with each other, right? And it's the most rewarding thing that I could do professionally and personally, to try and help people find solutions. And it's amazing to know that even if you just impact one person, it makes a difference. I used to try and think that I could try and save everybody, control everything and find all the solutions and just kick butt at everything. But at the end of the day, if you can do it just and help one person, I think that's something that's really meaningful. So
Agreed. Yeah, and I think that's really relevant in just today's society. Like 2 years into the pandemic, people are working from home, or people are over the road, or people doing all these different things. And ultimately, one positive transaction totally changes that person's day, where it's like you could be lost in your own thoughts. You could be dealing with traffic. You could be dealing with really grumpy salespeople. And then that person that call, Oriana, she's always so nice, or she's really uplifting there, or she told my victim mentality to shut up because ultimately there's a better direction. And I think that's just, it's a great quality to have. I try and leave like that too, or live like that, not leave like that, where I'm like, I start an email off with a good day, and I love saying thanks after someone's done something for me. Like just those little things where it's just impacting that one person. And I think, yeah, that's where the domino effect happens too. So it's just nice to see the alignment there. I think that's really
that's
cool.
great. Well, and there's so much. We're all going through things and we all have challenges and issues. And I like to think of it as I'm definitely not perfect. I can be high strung. So, but there's moments, and I've just had to kind of live by that, mindfulness theory, but also that, everybody's going through something. So if it's somebody in traffic that cuts you off, or somebody at work that maybe is underperforming, or, lashing out, and we're all going through things. So it's better to kind of just not take anything personally and empathize and just understand that people are people and we're all in this. And if we can just listen or just be there and not say anything and just understand that maybe somebody's going through something, I think it just changes that mentality and how we can work with others. And I think in turn, it helps others as well. So.
Completely agree. And that really aligns well to what our overarching topics are for today. And again, as we mentioned, it's a tough topic, and we're going to be talking about workplace violence and domestic violence. And so you mentioned it or initially where there's requirements in place. And I think often, especially in trucking, you still hear the, suck it up type attitude, or, that's not happening here, and ignorance is bliss. And that's not really the case. And I think the fact that, again, we've set the stage of, okay, who's Oriana? And anyone that's listened to the podcast with myself before, I try and, again, just lead with empathy. But I think seeing the fact that you're the expert in this space, and we're really going to dive into just part of it's the knowledge base, but part of it is your heart in this space when we're talking about these topics. Can you kind of, I guess, give us a rundown on how would you define workplace violence and domestic violence?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a variety of different things that go into this. So some people call it workplace violence, harassment, bullying, and then there's that domestic violence aspect to it. But really, it's workplace harassment. We'll go into 3 different phases of it. It's really just defined as like a single repeated incident. It's unwelcome conduct, it can include bullying, comments, or any action to intimidate or offend or make anybody feel not good about themselves. So, and the challenge with it is it creates a really unhealthy working environment, and it leads to psychological harm to workers, to people in general. And then that's where, employers are starting to notice that things changing in the workforce. It's not only just, he called me this and that. No, it's actually starting to affect people, or mental health is now more prominent than it ever was. And it's just become a big thing, and it's becoming more acceptable to know that these types of incidents can lead to that. Not only physical harm, but emotional and psychological harm. And workplace violence, I think it's fairly, I think we know what it kind of means, but it's aggression, it's physical attacks. It can also be, violent or written threats. It can include sexual violence, but that encompasses as well domestic violence. So, and domestic violence is a little different, where employers are like, how does this apply? Well, it applies in a little bit of a different way. it falls under that umbrella. But domestic violence really can seep into the workplace. So it's a hazard and it's a pattern of issues within a relationship. And it's somebody that usually tries to gain control, power within their intimate partnership. So, and that can cause a variety of different issues: physical, emotional, sexual, economic, or psychological issues and threats against a person. It can be very extreme, to terrorizing someone, to physical, but also be emotional. And a lot of people don't realize how that can affect people. And the stigma usually is, well, why would you stay in that? Why would you, and how does this even happen to correlate with our workplace? Well, it does, because at the end of the day, our workers come to work for 8 hours, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 12, whatever your shift cycles are. We're at work probably more than we are at home in a lot of ways. So that's where it can be an issue. And if you have somebody that's going through that situation at home, whether it's a woman, a man, not trying to gender bias either, whatever we identify as, dealing with that at home, it can seep in. It can seep into, somebody coming into the office and, bringing a gun to the office to find that individual who fled domestic violence. It can be that your employee is really underperforming. You're like, what is going on? They're really scared. They're just not acting the way that they used to. And, you're not sure what's going on. And sometimes the signs aren't identifiable. A lot of times they aren't. There's a lot of times these people that go through this. And myself, I have gone through domestic violence. So it's not something we want to talk about. And until it happens to you, you don't know how it really feels. So it's really just understanding, awareness, educating ourselves as employers, as workers, as society, of how it can impact us and how we can try to assist these people or try to make things easier, and just be more empathetic to those types of victims or people going through this.
Powerful. Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think the industry, like every industry, has gone through some form of a shift. Construction's really hammered down core. Oil and gas industry is really hammered into health and safety and everything that kind of comes in that package. Transportation, it's still lingering. And I think part of it is the people don't normally identify or truly can identify what trucking is. And when you're dealing with, say, an owner operator and say the man's on the road, the woman's doing the books, there is no off button. So if something's happening at work, so say the husband was torn to strips by the shipper and then he's torn to strips by the receiver, he comes home, whatever, it doesn't go away. There's no off button. So that's part of it. But you also mentioned it's hard to see. And I think that's something where, as again, society as a whole just navigates through different things. Mental health is really, it's become a hot topic. And I hope it doesn't stop at just, well, it's a fancy term. Like, I really hope that just employers and corporations and industry as a whole spend more time investigating, well, how am I doing? Because if I'm snapping at somebody and I happen to snap at somebody that has something going on at home, you don't really realize the domino effect there. But I think, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of unseen events and unseen just responses where someone's a rock star at work and then they're slipping. Okay, why? What's happening? And as an employer, instead of thinking, okay, well, I'm gonna hammer on them, I'm gonna get them in trouble, it's okay, let's be empathetic. Let's ask some questions, but also understanding, which we'll dive into today, what type of questions are even allowed to ask, because I get there's some boundaries and some things that we have to be mindful of. So from an employer's perspective, are there common, if we can call them signs, I wouldn't call them symptoms, of just something that people can look out for? Just if that's the biggest takeaway when we're talking about this after this conversation, like, hey, if it's performance based, if it's attitude, tone of voice, like, are there like noticeable things once you start looking, or is it just really, really hard to figure out?
So there are definite noticeable signs. There are some clear signs, and then there's unnoticeable signs. But the key thing to take away, and I think this goes for any way in life really, is that instead of assuming or just, rushing, like you said, to that performance management or, incident management, how can we punish them? Try to understand, and try to branch out and let that employee come to you. That's the best way to do it. But I mean, there's a variety of signs for different areas here. I mean, for victims of, workplace harassment, bullying, violence. I mean, you're going to see a lot of different things, and they all branch out. And it's the same with even domestic violence and harassment. You're going to see signs like social isolation, someone not sitting in the lunchroom, not taking their breaks, just, maybe sitting, in the washroom or the break room for very long periods of time. Continuous absences are something that you're going to want to be aware of. A lot of times we like to assume that, okay, this employee is just, they're just a bad apple. Well, potentially not. Like, there might be a reason for it, right? Complaints, we want to make sure that if people are complaining, we don't just go, oh, yeah, John, he's always having to complain about something. I know there are people like that, and there are situations like that, but if we can at least take them with a grain of salt and try to listen to people and document them, and then continue those conversations, it makes a big difference. You're going to see confusion, distraction, underperforming, lashing out. Some other ones can be obviously, threats, inappropriate comments or behavior, trying to test the limits at the workplace, seeing how far you can get away with things. And then obviously the more clear signs are like physical altercations and, swearing, calling people names. And when it comes to the hard signs for people that are going through this, it really depends on the person. Some people don't want to talk about it. And certain industries make it a little bit more challenging, special male predominant industries like construction and trucking. You don't want to just go and talk about your feelings because you're going to assume that someone might, take that and think that you're weak. And, or there's even places like, the police force or places like that. That's another place that you just can't talk about feelings. It's just, you can, but it's getting there. But the challenge is just those stigmas and thoughts that we have with that. Yep. Right. Yep. So when there's people that are going through, the hardest one to see would usually be someone going through domestic violence or abuse, whatever we want to call it. And those signs a lot of them can stem from the ones that we already talked about. But the biggest one would be someone that, I think the biggest would be the absences. Somebody that seems really weak, seems scared, that they're just not interacting with other people. They don't want to talk about things. They pack up their stuff at the end of the day. They go, they don't make conversation. They try to not make eye contact, and they just really don't feel it safe. The other challenge with that, and it makes it even harder for employers, which I totally empathize with, is now that the dynamic of working from home has changed, it's made it a big thing for people that are going through abuse, and not only even domestic abuse, but bullying and harassment. Some of these people don't see their employees all the time, but we're in a society where we have a lot of technology, and you got Instagram, TikTok, wherever, you've got all kinds of different areas, and people can branch out to their colleagues and text them, and and then it causes this work environment of a lot of friction, and employers don't maybe not even notice that, right? So those are things that are a challenge, but the biggest way to handle them is that empathy approach, and try to just get out of that mindset or the stigma that we're all doing something. If it's bad, it's bad. Not everything's bad. And we're not all doing things because we're bad people. Sometimes good people go through challenging things or bad situations. We all do. And it's just a matter of having that approach. And employers that have an open door policy and try to work on that culture, I think that's really important. And that's where you're going to find people being able to come and want to talk to you about these situations, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I love the fact that you continue to go to empathy over performance management, because I think I love the term, let's remove the tyranny and let's lead with empathy. And when you're able to just say something's up, even if it's a deep breath, you're mad, they didn't show up, they're late, they didn't show up at all, whatever it is, it's asking yourself, okay, is something going on aside from just work-based performance? And yeah, I think just keeping the human element into it, there's been a lot of challenges with the pandemic, but I think there's been a lot of opportunity to just become a better person through the pandemic. And I think empathy, being mindful of mental health, work overload, those type of things, they're just common terms now, again, that we need to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. But it's something where I push hard in the transportation industry just for it to become acceptable. And part of it too is culture. Part of it too is male and female, like just again, just understanding the fact that we're all different as people. If someone they came to Canada 6 months ago from a different country, I have a very different expectation in the workplace than they would. And that's just through experience. That's through, I don't know what they've been through to even arrive here. So just again, keeping that lens on, I think is important. So are there, if it's policies and or laws that employers have to follow when we're talking workplace harassment, understanding domestic abuse, that kind of stuff, is there like actual laws in place for this?
Yes, there are. So provincially and federally, they're both legislated. Workers' compensation as well is covered under that, and human rights. So they each deal with different things. The provincial government of Alberta or BC, wherever you live, and the federal government of Canada as well, under the labor standards, does have laws that are implemented for workers and employers that they have to abide by, which essentially what it means is that you should have a policy, you should have training, you should be documenting certain incidences and not allowing these incidences to occur. And if you are, how are you going to deal with it? And what can you do in the future to mitigate these hazards or the potential for these things to occur in the future? So really, legislatively, especially in Alberta, you require a prevention plan. So you want to get through those hazards. You want to see where you can mitigate those certain things. You need a policy that just talks about that you're not going to allow, bullying, harassment, any kind of violence in the workplace. And you also need to do training. So that is something, even if it's a quick trainer, I know a lot of times employees and, we're busy and employers, we don't want to do training, but just something quick, just a refresher on what that means, what's required, and the signs and what you can do if you notice certain things, and having a safe place really for workers to just report certain things. Maybe you don't feel comfortable in person talking about it. Maybe so-and-so isn't the manager or leader you want to talk to about it. But you could have an email address that you send things in. It's kind of like, a lot of places have a maintenance email. Have an employee kind of concern area where you can just send things in, you can have them documented, and then it's also there in writing so that if you respond, it kind of takes away that liability of you having to document and investigate all these things, because if you have some of that in writing, it helps to have that if it ever falls back on you in the future. So
smart. Is there, I guess, known resources available, like a web link or anything like that, that can help an employer if it's implementing a policy? Or training, I think, is a big one. Like, what type of training? Do you know of any like specific trainings or policies, anything like that, that they could refer to?
yeah, so there's quite a bit. It depends what you want to look at. I always recommend just doing your own training and summarizing some of these things. But there is a really good a course that Trucking HR Canada has created. I know that a lot of the industry has been aware of this, but they have a great program. I do think Shelley also, in a different aspect, with even human trafficking and things like that, she has a training program. The government of Alberta's got great resources, human rights, WCB, and then there's also a lot of different supports that you want for your employees and employers, workers, whatever you want to call them. So you have in your counseling services, and a lot of those places as well, that we don't realize that these counseling, like EFAP, we call them a lot of times, they actually have courses and training. So sometimes we can even ask them as an employer, hey, would you mind us, utilizing this for ourselves in our workplace? So those are really great resources that you could utilize. Myself, I guess, other people within the industry that have that labor relations, workforce kind of background in order to be able to develop those strategies and things like that.
Totally. Yeah, you definitely have my recommendation, and I've name dropped you countless times in just different environments, because it's nice. So there's some people that just know a lot, and that's cool, but it's nice when knowledge is actually in action. And I think that's where you really do well, is sure, I know it, but let's actually implement it and let's encourage it and let's make this a living culture. And I think that's another point of this conversation, just as, again, Oriana's my industry leader, is we need this stuff to be in action. It's great to have a policy in a book, and the book has 2 years of dust on it, and you can always say, we always refer to it by pointing, like that's irrelevant. It's the actual, what's your living culture? And I think that's a big part of prevention as well, is understanding that, like, from the moment, like again, different type of compliance, but you need to set that tone from the moment someone's hired. And that just has to be a repetitive conversation, is workplace violence is not tolerated. And if there's stuff going on at home, this is the process to follow, because that's a huge part of prevention, is knowing there's help, knowing that, I'm not going to get my butt kicked because I might cry in someone's office. Like, I've cried in an office before and I felt silly until I was comforted and saying, no, it's all good. You're like, I can tell this matters to you. So just being, I guess, implementing that culture is super important when we're talking prevention. And I think, just again, from a spot, like, I really focused on like the Google Earth perspective. And when we were preparing even for this conversation, I'm like, this direction, or this can go in any direction because it impacts so many people, that I think, prevention is a really key phrase. And part of your prevention plan has to be this constant communication, but also show it. And that could be, like, depending on the industry, okay, you're late for an order. How do you respond to that person? Are you the guy that, or gal, that screams on the phone? Or are you the one that says, okay, I understand. Yeah, we'll make it work. Like, there's just different approaches you can do when you're being in a prevention space. So is there any advice, aside from my little ramble there, when people are thinking, about prevention, like, because I think that word often, they're like, how do I do it? So is there, like, if it's 1, 2, or 3 big things that this is my go-to when we're talking prevention, that you can think of?
Yeah, there's quite a few things. My biggest thing I always recommend is try to be creative, try to have fun in the workplace, and have that open door policy, however that looks. You need to find different ways to communicate, because we have different backgrounds of people. We have different, genders. We've got a lot of diversity, and we've got people that are maybe experiencing a lot of different issues that may not even fall in with the category that we're talking about today. But I think the communication aspect would be number one to me. So not just using the phone, not just in person, going to someone, opening their door, actually, we've got Microsoft Teams, we've got Zoom. Like I said, create an email that employees feel comfortable where they can just send suggestions to. Or if there's something that doesn't work, you can also have an individual, maybe it's your safety rep, whoever it is, or just a person maybe that's just loves to be around the office, and they're just happy-go-lucky and everybody loves them. You can assign that person as having that task of being that kind of go-to mentor, or a coach, if we want to call it. And that individual can bring those concerns to the management, because a lot of times managers or directors, they don't have time to deal with a lot of this. And I know that a lot of them do want to, some don't, but having that will help employees to feel more comfortable. They'll be able to come to work, they'll be more productive, and it just overall makes things better. It also makes things better if people are going through serious situations like domestic violence, where they don't know who to reach out to. So those are things that if they can have something like a 24-hour, email or tip line, I don't know, if it's serious, even if it's a text to 555 or whatever you guys decide to use, you can at least know that you can action those issues. You can do it anonymously, whatever works, but communication is key. The other thing I would say is working from home is amazing. It's opened the door in so many ways, especially for industry. And it's going to help with retention and people wanting to be productive, and different people react differently. But if people are going through abuse or violence, or anything in the workforce that's causing them issues, or to, disengage, or to potentially, we could potentially have an issue at the workplace that could be violence. It doesn't matter if it's worker to worker, or if it's worker who's got an abusive partner that they've left or that they live with, and they just pissed off one day and they decided, I'm going to come to the workplace. Have prevention plans in place. That goes hand in hand with communication, but also have something that employees that are working from home, that they should check in if it's every, morning, lunch, at the end of the day, they should have a rep or somebody, a buddy system that they connect with. Just say, I'm here, I'm okay. Hey, how's it going? And then those are things that we can deal with, because you don't know if your worker is missing or not. And it's not micromanagement. And that would be something I discuss with the workers. It's more or less to know that, we have had incidents where we have to worry. We don't want to have to call the RCMP. And I know where I currently am, or I've been in the past, they do it every hour. You check in, you just turn your video on, whatever works. And if not, if it's after 15 minutes, they actually decide to, and they can't get a hold of your contact, that if there's an issue, they will call the police. So you let your employees know, if you don't check in, I don't care if you're at Tim Hortons, just get on your app or whatever, text me, that I'm running late, whatever, but we need to know you're around, because it's not for micromanagement. We need to know that everybody's safe.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So those would be two big things. And the other thing, really, it's just empathy. It's even just making the workplace more fun, engaging. In your workplace meetings, I know they're boring, everybody hates them, but make them more engaging for employees, whether it's, a quick Jeopardy game for safety moments, like, okay, if you do this, and at the end of the day, you win a Tim Hortons gift card for $10 or whatever. I don't know, but it's also just that commodity, like, I know this, but, and it's fun around the office. You could use it for 10 minutes, Jeopardy, things like that. Who wants to be a millionaire? I don't care. But just use those kind of things to make it a little bit more engaging, and people will want to come to you. And then that's also training. So it goes hand in hand. If you can make it encompass all of that and add a little fun to it, people are going to want to come to you. And then they're also going to have more fun and be more productive in the workplace. So using that empathetic approach, and just knowing that, I know we briefly talked a little bit about, performance management. A lot of times we get that confused with incident management or behavior, like, repercussions. It's not. Performance management should actually be, and how I see it, is that it should actually be a way to help train people and develop people and make them feel, how to reach certain goals, how to transfer them into certain different areas. What are they lacking? Instead of looking at them like they're a problem, okay, how can I help you? And then they're going to ask you, okay, well, how can I help you? And that's how you come up with that performance management tool. And it's going to be really to develop that employee and your workforce in general.
Yes.
So that's the biggest thing, looking at it in that aspect. And I mean, at the end of this, I'm going to create a document, or I have one, and we're going to talk about all this, and I can come up with some resources and people can reach out, just to make things a little bit more fun and dynamic. But yeah, definitely those are some things, now that I rambled.
It's powerful. Yeah, you mentioned two things that really stood out to myself, just being through my own journey. So journey management is often perceived as micromanagement. And even though you're working from home, you still have to have touch points. And I think what you highlighted is really important, because like my wife, she works from home. And aside from the fact that she's in meetings, if she wasn't in meetings, I don't know if they have a plan in place to make sure, Kathy, are you okay? And I think that's something that, as we just continue, a pandemic aside, I think we've proven to most types of jobs that maybe office positions or like floating positions, if you want to call it like that, you can work from home as long as you have the basics. You have a keyboard, you have maybe a laptop and a monitor, whatever. So it's not uncommon, I don't think, going into the future, for just more and more positions to be home-based. It's actually cheaper for the employer at times. But again, having those touch points, and it's not micromanagement, like you said, I like that. And then also, I really respect the performance management side, because often I think this is a pretty typical, if I'm talking from the lens of hiring a professional driver, is I look at a resume, okay, yeah. You put them through orientation, put them through training, you put them through mentorship, they're good. Now, all of a sudden, for some people, and I've been guilty of it before, is you expect perfection. And it's like, well, I make mistakes still. So how can I have that expectation of someone else? And when was the last time I actually asked someone how they were doing? Or I asked, like, so what do you want? Like, what's your long-term plan in life? And how does this job or career like align with that plan? Because a lot of people don't even think about that. And again, we could blame busy, because we're all busy, but I think it's just allocating time on the schedule to say, I'm going to call so-and-so today, tomorrow, so-and-so, and just having that performance management versus, yeah, perfectionism doesn't exist. So any employer listening to this, like if you ever use the word, you have to be perfect, well, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. There's no such thing. So, but I think that's a really good takeaway for just, yeah, our guests as well as in the future. And I'm stoked to read the article is, okay, we're human and how do we get better? And how do we make this employer better? Because ultimately no employer is perfect either. But I think, Oriana, some of that stuff was just so rock solid because we don't talk about that enough. We don't see that enough, especially if you're dealing with an event where someone was hurt. Maybe someone was cussed out in the parking lot because their skin color is different. And unfortunately, I hear that almost weekly where it's just like my natural protective instinct is I want to find the other person and give them a couple of smacks. Obviously can't do that, but it's the being in that environment where you're just, again, open culture and obviously getting creative, making things fun those are really, really good advices. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the other note, we didn't talk too much. We talked about the empathetic approach and, the performance management, using it as more of a career development and, where does your employee want to be and where do you want them to be and how can you help them and vice versa. That's important. But there are going to be instances where we do need to document things. We need to address them. I'm not saying, I think everything that comes to you that's obviously a validity, that you should address, it needs to be, especially when it comes to any harassment and bullying. Some of it might be minuscule, but it should still be addressed because then that also makes people in the workplace know that, nobody's going to want to come to you as an employer or want to work for you or feel comfortable coming to you if you don't deal with things. We can just let them all slide. And I mean, sometimes there's the odd thing, there might be, that Karen that continues to, you've all got that, but we still have to also make them, address them, and understand them, listen, and at least document it and see if there's anything you can do to mitigate that in the future, right? So that's just important because there are going to be issues and they need to be dealt with because that's also going to prevent any hazards or violence from happening in the future, right? But just important to keep that side note that it's obviously important, but if you focus more on the improvement aspect of our employees and even understanding that there are the victims in bullying, harassment, and domestic violence, but the abusers also are people. And whether they are, they seem like they're bad people or they're doing bad things, they too are people. So it might even be just having that discussion with them about, okay, what's going on, because a lot of times, I know in domestic violence for sure, abusers are people that were abused or have been abused. And a lot of times they're going through their own emotional turmoil. So in general, it's just a circle. Try to be as empathetic as you can. And I think that's where you're going to get the most buy-in.
Yeah, I agree. Is there, again, I don't want to sound too oblivious, but is there a specific requirement? Like, is it a scale? If something meets a 1 to 3, you have to do. If something is really, really bad, you have to do. Like, does the law get that specific, or is it still up to interpretation when you're dealing with? And I don't even want to bash the Karens, although I do think that term's funny, is a lot of times what they're complaining about, it's when you actually get to the root cause, it's like, oh, it's real. And negative Nancy's and Karen's, like, one thing is complaining. It's another if you're being specific. This happened. We got to do something about it. It's like, yeah, there's some validation there. So I guess that's the question then is, are there like specifics that you have to follow up with, or is it just employer interpretation on the situation?
There's always interpretation. I mean, legislatively, it's never black and white. But when it comes to these types of things, I think everything should be, first and foremost, you should have those kind of prevention plans and hazards identified each year. And you kind of list them as severity, so level 1, level 2, level 3. So that can be, obviously physical violence. That would be number 3. Number 1 could be just, I am sad that so-and-so told me that I'm being a POS today, or, they hurt my feelings. Okay, that's fine, but we should still address it. And I think just listening, even documenting it, because you never know. it's funny how some of these situations, even in my job, someone has an injury and they think, no, it's not a time loss. It's not. They don't have to. They just fell. Okay, they went back to work. Cool. But then you see like 3 weeks later or a month later, they're in the hospital because of that. Because something else internally happened. They have injury to the brain. There's other trauma. You don't know. Same with a paper cut. People have had their fingers amputated over things. We like to think that everything might, or certain things are small, but there's always potential. So document it, put it down, even if it doesn't seem like much, it's good. And those are good discussions to have in performance management. And when we're having those discussions with our employees, like, how are you feeling? Has this gotten better? And it also keeps us aware, because if you have hundreds of employees, you can't remember everything. So if you can have that area where you have that documented for each employee, perfect, right? And then it saves your butt, so that if you need to work on something and actually mitigate things and deal with things, you've got that down too. So that if there is an investigation, whether OH&S has to be involved or, WCB, you do need that. So
powerful. Yeah, again, that was a question that I'm always wondering, because I like living above the expectations. But I have a lot of employers that gratefully invest their time listening to our platform. And that's the type of advice they need to know, but then they have to comply with. And I think that's, again, why I'm fortunate that I can highlight yourself in this space. Is if she's saying it's accurate, and if she's saying, hey, you're probably going to want to document that, document it. And ultimately, that 5 minutes of paperwork is going to save you possibly money, time, retention. Like, there's a lot of benefits there. But ultimately, like, I remember, I forget who was training the course, but they were talking about like crucial conversations. And they were talking about the power of even remembering someone's name, and remembering, like, especially post-incident, like if you're interviewing a witness and you remember their name and you remember just their tone of voice, like those kind of things, like, you're not going to remember it all. Like, I completely understand that, but it's those little things. And then you can say, oh yeah, I got it, document it, I'm going to refer to it. Again, it's protecting your butt, but it's showing that person, hey, you took me seriously, thank you. And you just open door policy. But yeah, it's a really good advice. I appreciate you sharing that.
yeah, well, even it's something so small and silly that you think it might not matter. But even having a document when you hire somebody, your onboarding package, as a part of that, have a bunch of fun questions. Like, I don't care what it is. Like, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do in your spare time? Do you have another job? You don't have to answer that. I guess certain things. But if I was a cookie, or if you were a cookie, what kind of cookie would you be? Ask those, but then it's good. Just, it brings the fun to it, but it's also something that you can fall back on, so that if you're having conversations, you have a lot of employees, it's something that you can kind of look back in that file and say, oh, okay, yeah, okay, here's something that we can connect on, laugh about, whatever it is. But it also helps you to get to know that worker on a personal level. And of course, they don't have to answer them, but it's a way to just, okay, if you're comfortable, these are some questions just for fun, so that we can get to know you. And you guys can all do something with those at, a staff meeting, okay, everybody has to answer this question, right? And then it makes it kind of a fun kind of game, but it helps everybody get to know each other, and just to be able to relate with those workers. And that can be the same way. Have them do it. What are your challenges at work? Once a year, just like a little document on the computer. I don't care. A few questions. What are your challenges? Where do you want to be? And how can we help you?
Totally. Yeah. Annual reviews are powerful. And I think that's an underutilized tool by far, is because it takes time. But yeah, absolutely. You're so right. So right. Yeah. So I appreciate that. Do you think about the impact that you're having on, if it's just in day to day, if it's obviously in an environment where, hey, someone really needs me right now, maybe it's just advocating for industry, maybe it's having coffee with like a colleague, but do you think about the impact that you have on that person? Like, is that something you're just naturally think about, or is it subconscious, or are you just kind of like, yeah, I guess so? Like, how do you feel about this, the impact that you, and I asked the question because you always impact me. And I just appreciate the fact that you're you're a very passionate advocate. And it's nice, again, that you know what you're talking about. It's not a lot of, well, maybe you could do it. This is what you need to do. So I really respect that type of advice. And yeah, I just often wonder, like, do you think about the impact you're having on people in our industry?
Nope, definitely don't, because I am a woman and I am not that I'm saying I'm like every woman, but a lot of times we undervalue, or people in general, we undervalue ourselves, and we don't think about those kinds of things or pat ourselves on the back enough. And mainly at the end of the day, I do it because it makes other people feel good, and that's what makes me feel good. So if I can be of assistance, I'm not here to charge anybody. I'm here to just, the more value I can provide to somebody or educate them, find a solution, help them, it makes me feel good. And at the same time, they're usually helping me, because you can value, it's always a value. It's a double-sided sword. Always. You can learn from everybody you talk to. And even though you think you're just helping them, they're helping you too. And you can find out so much about them. And if you can help somebody, they're going to be more apt to help you too. So at the end of the day, it's like that by the Bob Berg. I know you've read that, The Go Giver. It's just a great way to live by, is just, how can you provide value in somebody's life? Don't expect anything out of it. But if you do need something and you become friends, you form that relationship, people are more willing to, be able to help you when you need it as well. So
Powerful. I like that. I like that for sure. So just as we come to a close, Oriana, were there any final thoughts you would like to share? But also, if someone listening to this conversation, or maybe they're reading the blog article and they're struggling with something, are you comfortable if we share, if it's your email address, some form of contact details, so that way they could reach out? Maybe it's just ask a question. Maybe they're an employer looking for some help on how to implement something. Are you comfortable sharing that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody that has any questions, concerns, if you need me to kind of provide some consulting services, whatever it is, questions, you need help with a policy, or you just say, hey, can you look at this? Does it kind of fit the guidelines? Absolutely. Or, hey, this employee is doing this, or what can I do? If you have questions about how to make it more fun and, more approachable in the workplace, there's a lot of different opportunities and options, and we could talk about them forever, but we've only got a little bit of time. So anytime, I'm always here.
Awesome. Perfect. No, I appreciate that. So yeah, I'll make sure to include your email address then, if that's probably the best, just in the show notes as well. So, but yeah, as we did come to a close, was there anything more that you wanted to provide, any insights or anything, or how you feeling?
I don't know. I feel like we talked about a lot of power. I could keep talking, so I don't know.
Good. It's an open forum. It's good.
Yeah, no, I just think there's so many supports for people. And it's a topic that nobody really loves it. Always people think, oh, not again, right? But it is something that's powerful. And if you can deal with this, then you're going to have better culture. You're going to have better retention, and people are going to want to work for you. And if you can add a bunch of different supports and areas of communication, and you just can transform things and have that open door, it'll make things much better for the workforce and people. And that goes hand in hand with safety and compliance, and that goes in hand with HR, not having to deal with many issues. It's just, and then you're probably going to make more money because people are going to be happier. They're not going to have those people bullying them, or they're going to feel safe coming to work. The only other thing I would say, I guess, that I forgot to touch on from working from home is, if you do have an individual that you think may be experiencing any kind of violence at home or abuse, especially during the pandemic, the best way would be to see if you can provide them the opportunity to go and work in the office, right? Have your measures in place, have limited people that are allowed in the office, have your distancing, whatever it may be. But give them that opportunity, and provide also supports if it's, I know relocation is a hard thing to say, but if there's any way you can help them to even move, especially in the transportation industry, we've got trucks, we've got things. So if we can help them out in any way, to be able to leave those situations and to feel safe, whether it's our working environment and being able to go to work more instead of having to be at home with that individual, just opening that and coming up with some kind of creative solutions that are maybe don't even cost you anything, right? Obviously certain things will, but if we can do that, that makes a big difference, and that'll also find you a solid worker that's going to want to work with you too, right?
Powerful. Yeah, agreed. And again, it's just being there. I think that's really key, is especially when they're not face to face. And you're right, there's tons of people working from home, and signs and symptoms or signs are really hard to see over a screen because you can fake it. And yeah, I think that's really, really good advice, is just having those opportunities and offering that type of support before you even think, oh, I never thought someone would ask for that. It's like, just offer it. So yeah, that's really, really key. That's smart.
Yeah. Just throw the question out to employees. If you, for any reason, required to work from the office for a certain period, we can talk about it. So send me an email. Let's talk about it. And then you have certain guidelines, if it's mental health reasons, if it's violence, whatever it may be. If it's just because I want to go into the office, well, then that's probably not the best way, especially if we've got these tools in place for COVID. But depends on you as employer.
Yes. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Oriana. And I appreciate you joining. Again, we've been looking forward to this conversation for a little bit of time now. And I think just you hit so many nails on the head of just like, make it fun. Talk, have an open door policy, get creative, but also there are specific rules that you have to comply with that I think sometimes people shun out and say, oh, it's not for me. Yeah, it is. If you can define yourself as an employer, then yeah, it's for you. So yeah, I really do appreciate you joining the podcast today, and just again, for your continuous advocacy for so many people in the industry. And just, yeah, I really appreciate our friendship as well. So thank you again, Oriana.
Yes.
This was great.
Thank you. It was fun. And I can't wait to the next one. So we'll have to talk about that.
Agreed. Completely agree. So thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your
Yes.
Well, we're recording on a Saturday, actually. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
You too.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Oriana, first off, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today. Just really appreciate just the value that you shared and the honesty about this super important topic. Workplace violence and domestic violence, they're no joke. And we need to all better understand what are our responsibilities to prevent these from happening, but also how much impact responding with empathy can have. So for those listening, if you have a question about today's conversation, you would like to learn more, maybe you're not sure if your policies are set up correctly, make sure that you reach out to Oriana directly. I've included her contact details in the show notes below. So if this is the first time you've ever checked out a Truck Focus podcast, I welcome you to our community. And for all of our dedicated listeners, I just want to continue to say how grateful I am for your investment of time. I really appreciate you guys checking out this episode. So I do ask that you like this episode, share it to those that you feel would also get value, but also subscribe to the channel that you're listening on. So this way you're notified of all of our upcoming content. Again, Oriana, I just really appreciate your honesty, the leadership, and the passion that you lead with. I just believe it's a huge part of your advocacy. And if you did have questions about today's episode, and maybe you're wondering, I don't know if I have the right workplace harassment policy in place, or, hey, I need to get creative in how I can ensure all of my employees are safe, reach out to Oriana. She has so many great ideas, and she really can teach you what is the legislative responsibility, what has to be done. And I think that's really key. So again, all of her contact details are in the show notes. As always, let's create a pivotal impact. Bye.